So I wanted to continue down the road that I kind of started talking down, which was what's observable and what's detectable inside of the platform. We left off talking about some of the different extensions that are enabled by LimaCharlie. So if I go and we'll talk about extensions, I'm actually probably going to naturally segue into them, and we'll move some of the modules around. I don't think we have folks picking and choosing this afternoon what happens. But before we drill into extensions too much, I want to continue down this road of like what's observable and what's not observable. And I lean on our documentation sometimes just because it can be useful sometimes in illustrating a point or something that I just don't feel like writing a detection for in the hot seat. But nonetheless, I want to continue down this idea of like things being detectable or things being observable in the platform. We talked about like basic system telemetry. We talked about like arbitrary data that I might bring in. We talked about the extensions themselves. Don't get it twisted. Even though there's no ext in front of binlib, it is its own extension and whatnot. If I go and I enable a third-party extension, that's going to include its own sensor. The other thing, or things, if you will, that you've got the ability to detect against are these things called alternate targets inside of the environment. And I'm quoting the documentation specifically here, detections on alternate targets. I'm bringing this up because we actually have, and those of you who work here will know, those of you who don't won't, and that's okay, I'll share it with you. We actually have a user right now who's trying to figure out how to write detections for detections. As weird as that may sound, let me explain kind of what that means, and you can see some of these different events up here. So by default, if I bring in any telemetry from, again, an agent, a log forwarder, or whatever it might be, an adapter, a sensor, any sensor, that's going to be the default run. So if I say event type equals new process, EDR. If I say event type equals suricata alert, that's going to be a suricata alert. Those by default look at those kind of primary sources of event streams. There are other sources that we can detect against that are not extensions, that are not observable events, but are instead things happening behind the scenes in the platform or happening as things that we might have requested the platform to do. The first one is detection. So funny enough, this stream of detections right here, all of these things that are being populated from all of these detections that I'm running, this stream itself is detectable, is observable, which means I can write detections for detections. So I can say something to the effect of like, this Linux command clear, okay? If I go and I look at my detection and response rules, which is right here, and I'm gonna find it, this Linux command clear right here looks for instances of where the clear command is being run, and it's run with the command line of clear. This is a very, very specific, narrow rule. I would not recommend using this anywhere. Also, the clear command runs quite a lot, especially in my terminals, because I'm always like moving stuff up to the top and whatnot. But that's what that detection does, is it looks for the running of the clear command. This right here is the detection for that. So I get insights into the particular process, I get all the details behind it, so on and so forth. But this itself is an observable stream. You'll notice that this detect thing is right here. It includes the original event that was fired. But let's just say, hypothetically, I wanted to write a detection for this detection. And let's just say I was like, you know what? I'm interested in every single time the clear command is being run. That's my starting point. I'm also really interested, like really, really interested in every time it's run from a bash prompt or a bash terminal. I could write 2 detection and response rules if I wanted to. One of them would be for every single time the clear command is run, and the second one could be every single time the clear command is run, add and includes bash. But I'm going to have a duplicate in there, and I don't want that. What I would rather do is I would rather say, let me write 1 detection and response rule for every time clear is run, and then I'm going to write a subsequent detection, a meta detection that says, hey, whenever you see this thing, if bash is in here, fire again. Or do something different, whatever the output option might be. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But you have the ability to observe the detections here. Where this becomes super useful is, let's just say there's something that you want to know if it happens multiple times. Meaning a user with the wrong password, is that good or bad? Once, good or bad? 10 times in a minute? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. No one can type that fast. Well, a lot of us can type that. Okay, 10 times in 2 seconds? There we go. Doesn't make any sense. Feels automated at that point. So I've also got the ability to say, give me some temporal insight into this. And we'll talk about how that works. Take a look at all my process events of me testing out all that stuff and whatnot, so you can see me going through and actually running through and performing all the updates. Sorry, way off of what we're talking about. I just like the fact that all the work we were doing is represented in here. But nonetheless, I want to call that out as something that can be observed. Other things that you can observe against, other things that you can write rules against, I'm going to pick up the second and then the bottom two is deployment and then audit and billing. These are 3 platform-specific streams. If any of you are in kind of the management deployment role where you're managing deployments or you're managing a team of people who are using LimaCharlie, you're going to care about these 3. A sensor being deployed, a fleet of sensors being deployed. That is a stream I'm going to want lots of information about when it's happening, what's being deployed, and what's happening out there. And if I kind of scroll down, these deployment events relate specifically to things like enrollment, sensor clone, over quota, deleted sensor, so on and so forth. What that is a really powerful stream to be like, something's not right here. Meaning I'm deploying 1,000 sensors, but only 900 are checking in. Where are my other 100? What's going on here? I'm deploying sensors, but they keep showing up under the same host name. What's happening here? This is going to be an important stream for that one. The other 2 that I haven't, or sorry, there's 2 others I'm going to drill in specifically, and that's artifact and artifact event. Wow, that's a lot bigger than I thought. Artifact and artifact event. This is going to be a stream particularly dedicated towards artifacts, obviously. If I'm pulling artifacts off of systems, there's going to be a separate stream that I could write detection and response rules against. The last one, which I don't know if a lot of people know about, especially some really good power LimaCharlie users, is schedule. Schedule is, and I can't think of a better way to describe this one, and I'm such a huge fan of this one as well. Schedule is kind of like cron jobs, but built into the LimaCharlie platform. And it gives you an opportunity to actually say, and I'm going to find the, I want to find a sample rule for this one. But schedule actually gives you the opportunity to say, hey, LimaCharlie, I want you to set up a ticker, a clock, if you will, and I want you to do things on a certain interval. Here we go. So here's one, for example. You'll notice at the top, the event that I'm looking against. The event is not a detection and response, is not an EDR event. That's not a log. That's not a particular entry or an arbitrary data source. That's a timer. So there is a cron capability built into LimaCharlie that says, once every whatever, per whatever, I want you to do a thing. So in this case, every 168 hours per sensor, assuming it's a Windows platform, my target schedule means I'm hitting that cron capability. And when you do that, I want you to run a package list. In the short form, once a week, I want you to dump a list of packages from every single Windows sensor that is online in the platform. That's the short English. I shouldn't say short. I'm going to say the basic English version. The technical way of implementing that is to break down that question. But again, let's think about the initial question here. I want to collect a list of packages from every single Windows sensor daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it might be. Whatever the frequency might be, I want to collect this thing. I want to ask that question. Now, I could task an intern, because I wouldn't make anyone in here do it. I could task an intern and say, hey, I want you to go into the UI and once a week, make this your every Tuesday. I want you to download all the package lists and then be done. Or I can go to LimaCharlie and I can simply say, hey, I'm going to utilize that native built-in cron functionality that allows me to, once a week, hit all Windows sensors and pull that package list down. Now, you might be like, well, Matt, wait a second, where does this get stored? That's where that investigation nomenclature comes in. So I'm kind of going to start to bridge now into the advanced response topics from a detection and response capability. We've covered it in length, the types of things I might look for. The next step of, okay, I found it. Hey, LimaCharlie, I want you to go look for when this thing happens. Okay, I found it, Matt. What do you want me to do with that? That's going to be the response portion. The response portion is where you've got the opportunity to build in, first off, your response actions. Obviously, it's also a chance where I can store lots of metadata. It's a place where I can put information about the alert, about the type of detection, about what's being seen and whatnot. And I can drop all sorts of information in here. Let me see if I can find another one that maybe gives us a little more insight into what's happening here. Oh, perfect. Here's some more rules that focus on the deployment target. So just to kind of reiterate those different alternate targets that you might have, this is one that's looking for instances of where the sensor over quota happens. And in this case right here, there's just a report that says, hey, you've gone over quota. But we'll talk about some of those different actions and whatnot in just a moment here. All right, cool. Drilling into it a little bit further, getting into the detection and response side of things, I've got a blank rule listed right here. And I like to also drill into what you can do from a response perspective. Because again, it's like, okay, Matt, I found a thing. What do you want me to do now that I found that thing? The default security approach, and I'm talking like across any tool or across any platform, is to just dump it into this detections window. In fact, there's a lot of tools out there. Let me switch to a different tenant. There's a lot of tools out there that won't even give you an option. They'll just simply say, here's your donut chart of criticals, highs, mediums, and lows. Here's your graph of whatever. Here's your MITRE attack matrix color shaded chart. And here's all those types of things. You don't really have an option of what you do with that detection. In here, and I'm not really contrasting and comparing, I'm just saying here, we give you a little bit of a different approach where I can actually customize what happens in that response capability. The default is going to be dump this out to the detections here. Meaning, if I specify the report action, and I'm going to zoom in on a rule and we'll see what that looks like. If I specify the report action, that's going to throw out into that detections window. This is the name that it's going to have. That's what's going to show up. If I wanted to write a detection rule for this detection, that's the name that I would be referencing. And in here, I can put all sorts of metadata if I want to. There's a metadata category where I can simply say metadata. And then to your question earlier about version control, rule changes, and all those types of things, I would highly recommend utilizing like the metadata field for that because it's going to give me the chance to use metadata as well as some of the different tagging and comments and stuff to help kind of let people know what's happened with that rule. I want to give you a representation of what that looks like. One of the other things that I've done inside of this tenant is I've enabled Sigma rules. Soteria rules, huge thanks to the Soteria team for enabling those. Man, they've got so many. Good Lord. It's like these guys don't do anything but detect bad guy stuff. There we go. I've also got a bunch of Sigma rules built in here as well. So when we import Sigma rules into LimaCharlie, we import the rule, we convert it to LimaCharlie syntax. We also bring in the metadata from that particular rule as well. And this is where it gets super useful. I'm off to the right-hand side here. This is where I can see the description of the rule, what fired, what my analyst should be looking for, what might generate a false positive, what references to look for. And because it's a Sigma rule, it's even got all this attack metadata in here as well. You've got the option to repeat this for your own set of rules if you'd like to, and I would highly recommend doing so. Keeping rule metadata in place makes it really easy for my analyst to be like, hey, what's this thing? What does this mean? What should I be looking for? What's the importance of having this in here? So from a version control perspective, I would recommend having an arbitrary field, which is like version, very similar to what you see with other detection rules, and just incrementing that as you go along. We won't build this pipeline here as part of this session, but I would drop in one other recommendation. So just to kind of show you all, here's my Linux command clear command, right? Here's the detection for it that fired. Let's keep this in here. I'm going to hopefully keep the microphone nice and close by. And if I hop over to my infrastructure as code, let's hope this works. If it doesn't, we're going to have a lot of questions to answer. Nonetheless, if you notice as I scroll through, all of my detection and response rules, once we get down to like the meat of it, are all located inside of here. So there's all the metadata, there's all the different commands, and one thing I recommend folks doing when you're building out detection and response rules is go take a look at some of the examples that are out there so you can kind of see like what those examples look like, how they've been built out, and then subsequently how they would kind of transfer into the platform and everything like that as well. And there's a really, really good way of just like observing what's been in there already and then be like, oh, okay, I'm going to use that as an example, as a way to bring them in. And then obviously documentation helps out as well. Here's all those Sigma rules. Here's those Sigma rules being dropped in and different metadata values and the attack matrices and everything associated with them. So again, I can see it all from a YAML perspective. I can see my rules written up. I can see them at the UI. And if I wanted to go through and make changes or version control, I could easily link that with a GitHub repository or something if I wanted to. Oh, I'm getting close. I might actually find my rules. It's alphabetical, right? Didn't I say that? There it is. There we go. There's my Linux command and clear role. I knew I'd find it. I just had to scroll through 90,000 lines of YAML really quick. So there's my detection portion. There's my response portion. Here's my user metadata. And I would highly recommend utilizing these fields in version control. And if I subsequently wanted to sync this with a Git repo, if I wanted to have my rules kind of in a separate fashion where I could say, I'm going to write my rules in YAML, convert and merge them in at certain times and whatnot, you could easily set that up from this infrastructure as code perspective. And obviously, this also translates into a detection as code approach, because even though I was back in the UI a little bit earlier, this is just a YAML file. But this is that whole detection and response portion built out. Now let's just say hypothetically, I was like, you know what, this name is really generic. Let me change this name to make it something a little bit more specific. So we're going to call this a mission control alert instead. I'm going to hit apply. Powerful changes afoot. I love the people who make our UI. There's always some really interesting stuff going on there. We're going to go ahead and just kind of let this sync in the background. It's 96, 98, 99,000 lines of YAML running through. In any event, we're done. That's it. So we've gone through and just changed a detection and response rule. Maybe that wasn't the most version control-y way to change it, but nonetheless, it's possible. It's possible to manage all of this from a repo, run it in through a pipeline, build automation processes around it if you need to. And then again, I can then implement processes and change controls that say, okay, detection engineering team, here's the way we write detections, here's how we sync them, here's when we push them. Are we up to the minute? Are we day by day? Are we half a day? Are we weekly? Whatever the process might be, that's how we go through and sync it all. I will make a note as well. Hopefully some folks saw this. There is the ability to push and fetch and do dry runs from a config perspective to see hey, is this gonna break anything? What's gonna happen in here? But let's go back to detections. I wanna go back to our response portion because that's where the most fun comes in. And this is going to be a natural segue into our extensions as well. For anyone who's kind of keeping track, I don't think anybody is, but in case you are, I'm swapping the last two modules with my name on them, just because naturally our conversation is leading us there. So the response portion of the detection and response rule is where I answer that question of, okay, I found it. What do you want me to do? You have the ability to just dump in the detections window, as I mentioned, but there's a lot of other options in there as well. And I like to kind of drill into what the different response actions might be. And hang tight, I'm going to get there by looking through what my different actions are. Perfect. Okay. We're going to put that there. We're going to come back to here. And we're now thinking about a detection and response rule. When we're determining what to do from a response perspective, this is where I get to say, LimaCharlie now hands the reins over to you. Up until this point, everything we've talked about has been data normalization, getting things into the platform, determining whether or not it is of value, changing fields around, manipulating timestamps, manipulating sensor host names, so on and so forth. This part right here, the response portion, is where your processes and what you do as a SOC, as an MDR, as an IR firm or whatever, this is where you take over. All right, that's it. My talk's over. We're done for the day. I'm just kidding. This is where you, whoever was clapping, thank you. This is where you come over and say, what do we do on behalf of our customers? What do we do on behalf of my IT team? Do we kill the process? Do we close a network connection? Do we run additional collection scripts? What do we do? What is our standard operating procedure? Whatever it is you're looking to do, we can likely help you figure out. So in this case right here, it might be really easy. And I might say, all right, if bits admin runs, I don't really have enough evidence to prove it's 100% inherently malicious, so we're just going to report it to the detection window. And then maybe we have some additional analytics or something happen with it, but that's about as far as we're going to go. We're not going to let that happen, right? Or we'll go this way. And we'll say, if an event comes through in Microsoft 365 that involves mail items being deleted, and this is a test rule I was running around a little bit earlier, this is super critical. Super, super critical for us. So I don't want to just report to the detection window that a mail item was deleted. I also want to send an alert to PagerDuty that says, yo, guess what? Mail item got deleted. We're getting hosed here. We need to deal with this right now. In the same window, in the same response window, I'm putting in these customization options that say, I want you to report, and I want you to also send an alert out to, or send an alert or a page, I guess, to PagerDuty. But let's go a step further. So to kind of like quickly pause on that, right? To quickly pause on that detection and response rule, that is one where I am saying there's an action that happened that I'm curious about. And not only do I want to report it to the detections window, but I also want to send a page out. This is one of the very first times where we're referencing a third party to send our data out. Now, this one right here references PagerDuty. I'm going to talk about some of the other extensions in just a moment. But I want to first look at, I've got two different actions built in the same response action. So I'm able to take that rule, and I'm able to say, I want you to do these two things. They're just going to happen concurrently, right? I could add and expand as many more as I needed to. Let's just say hypothetically, I was like, not only do I want you to send a thing to PagerDuty, I also want you to send a message to Slack in a dedicated output stream or something like that. As vast as you want to make it, you can. But let's take a look at a different one. Let's take a look at this one right here. So this is a scheduled target platform. So this one is going to run against my Linux systems, and I'm hitting that cron job again. And I'm saying for every 30 minutes per sensor, I want you to, let me zoom back out and then come down here. For every 30 minutes, every Linux sensor, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and collect a list of processes that are running, and I want you to store it in my weekly package list. FYI, that's not a list of packages, it's a list of processes. So we might want to change that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I also want you to go and here's like the plain text English version. I also want you every 30 minutes to go and collect the auth log from that system. And I'm going to do it in a really weird way. I'm not going to configure this artifact necessarily. I'm actually going to issue a command. And I'm going to tell the reliable tasking extension, hey, I want you to go and collect this particular file. So it's going to be an artifact request. I want you to hold on to it for 3 days. And the thing I want you to collect is /var/auth.log. Quick FYI, the time to live for that is going to be 86,400 seconds, which is how long? Anybody know? Isn't that a day? So here's another one. And all I'm doing, just in case anyone's curious about like, wait, what is this road that Matt's going down right now? We're not talking about malware or bad guy activity. No, we're not. We're talking about detection and response rules and the things I can do with them and utilizing different extensions. In this case right here, I'm looking for every single instance of where a system connects, an EDR sensor connects to the environment. And I want you to give me a few qualifiers which say, is that thing Linux, number one, and is it tagged LC stable? And if it is, I want you to go and add the tag LC latest and remove the tag LC stable. This is an infrastructure change. This is a change of where I'm changing tags on my systems, but I'm doing it from a systematic or a programmatic approach. So let me kind of summarize the past like 15, 20 minutes of what we've been walking through. I wanted to show you all that this detection and response system is not just bad guys and malware and things like that. It is an extremely capable automation system where you can ask questions of your environment. What do I want to pull? What do I want to change? What information do I want to know? How do I go and collect this? And can I make the computer collect it for me? So this right here was actually put into production by a customer of ours who was dealing with a population of systems that were mistagged. The installation key that they were using had the wrong version tag with it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a thing they did incorrectly or whatnot, right? There was also an instance of another customer who deployed this because they simply needed to change the tags over. But in this case right here, they had deployed systems with an LC stable tag, and they were looking for LC latest. Folks, this is version control from a LimaCharlie perspective. This is simply saying, I want to move from the stable version to the latest version. How do I go about doing that for N thousand of systems simultaneously? Right here. You just deploy it programmatically to automatically check in. But where there's a lot of value, like a lot of value, is when you utilize those response actions to reference some of our other types of tools and other capabilities that are out there, which is pulling on our extensions. Now, this is where I like to head over to our marketplace and talk about them. We've already kind of seen some of them in action, and I've already talked about them from a theoretical perspective. Let's drill into what they actually are, because they tie in very closely with response actions and response capabilities. So, thus far, everything we've talked about has been LimaCharlie, LimaCharlie, LimaCharlie specific, meaning detection and response, getting telemetry in, configuring adapters, dealing with detection and response rules, events versus responses. When we get into the idea of extensions and add-ons, and I believe you're going to hear about some really cool development things that folks have built after this. When we get into the idea of extensions and add-ons, we're talking about expanding the platform into more than it is on the surface, which, by the way, is, I think, a really cool feature and what I want out of almost any platform that I work with. But in this case right here, an extension is something that simply says, you have this infrastructure system that scales as wide and vast as you want it to. What else would you like to do with that platform? The other question that gets asked is, you have an EDR sensor that you have full control over. You can use it to deploy files, you can use it to collect files, you can use it to collect telemetry, you can use it to do all sorts of things. You have an interactive EDR agent. What else would you like to do? Notice how I boil a lot of this down to just like basic English questions? So I might have an example, an extension. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. I might have one that says, hey, LimaCharlie, I would really like to be able to Yara scan, because that's how I look for malware. Can you please, and we're going to like do the basic English version of this, can you please turn the sensor into a vehicle that I can use to also Yara scan with, in addition to everything else that can be done? Sure, no problem. Enabling the Yara extension, folks, here's what it doesn't do. It doesn't go out and download yara.exe, put it on your system, and then run a bunch of scans for you. It's actually a module that's built into LimaCharlie. Hey, I want to enable Yara scanning. Cool, click, subscribe, done. You're now able to Yara scan. What that does is it takes the EDR sensor, gives it the ability to ingest and process Yara rules, run them against memory, or run them against files on disk, and now I've got Yara scanning capabilities built in. Didn't have to do any additional work. Didn't have to download yara.exe, didn't have to hire a whole detection engineering team. I just simply had to subscribe to it. If we go back to some of our extensions, there's other extensions in here which say, hey, LimaCharlie, I would really like to be able to, and this is everyone's favorite one, so I'll pick on this one. By the way, I am severely outnumbered by folks with Velociraptor experience in this room, so if I say anything wrong, let me know. Please, I'm looking at one specific table in the back there, but we'll leave that table alone. But nonetheless, hey, LimaCharlie, I need to collect advanced digital forensic information from my endpoints, and I need to do it at scale, and I need to do it quickly. Can you help me get there? Sure. I've got this ability for you to upload files and run them, and then pull the output back. We already saw all of this earlier. Why don't we just automate that for you, utilizing something? So Velociraptor comes into play. It's an advanced digital forensic and incident response tool. Now, I love the comparison here because sometimes, and I get this question sometimes where folks are like, why would I need Velociraptor if I have LimaCharlie? And I'm like, first off, they're obviously not the same thing. Let's figure that difference out first. Second, sometimes I want an advanced forensic tool because maybe I'm comfortable or familiar with it, or maybe it collects something that LimaCharlie doesn't collect in the same manner. So I'll use, from a forensic perspective, the evidence of like program execution. Folks, this is not a digital forensic training, but I'll just leave it at this. There's about, 50 different ways to figure out something ran on a system from an execution perspective. And if I don't have a new or existing process event for that, I'm left with other artifacts that don't stream in. Collecting those artifacts and then parsing them manually, sure, you can do that if you want. But with Velociraptor, I can just go and do it automatically, and instead of analyzing 50 files and then trying to parse them all, I'm analyzing one JSON document, we're done. So it's a feat, or I should say a skill in kind of efficiency and looking at data in a much better way. Velociraptor is a tool that allows you to do that. But here's the cool thing. I don't want you all manually managing and running a tool like Velociraptor. I don't want you having to spin, unless you really need to, I don't want you spinning up a server, deploying yet another endpoint sensor, managing that in addition to LimaCharlie, comparing telemetry back and forth. I would rather you say, I need Velociraptor for these 3 different types of data pools. Deploy, run, deploy, run, deploy, run, we're done. And you're all set. What's happening behind the scenes is we're taking a bunch of the little different pieces that we've talked about in a singular level, and it's just combining them together for you. And then I get that beautiful extension sensor, ext-Velociraptor, that's monitoring all of these events and making them available for me. Now, all of these different extensions that we're talking about in here are all things that are addressable inside of our detection and response rules. So let me see if I can find one that's got a good detection and response rule built in. There we go. So we've got this other tool out there, Hayabusa. Hayabusa is a tool, forensic tool that allows you to actually run scans against Windows event logs. And I'm going to keep it at that generic high enough level category. We're not drilling too much into it right now. I want to take a look at the detection and response rule that's in front of us at the bottom of this page. So first off, this is not pivoting off of an EDR event. This is not pivoting off of a telemetry-based event. This is pivoting off of an artifact event. We talked about this one a little bit earlier, one of those alternate events that I can detect against. It is detecting against that, and it's saying, if the artifact that is brought up is a Windows event log, I want you to go ahead and run Hayabusa against it. A really easy way to automate a security tool like this that I'm going to be honest with you, in any other capacity works really well, but is hard to scale. Admittedly, tools like this are sometimes very hard to scale if you don't have some sort of a scaling framework in place. Now, could I go and deploy some other type of tool, or could I deploy some other type of endpoint agent and maybe try to fit it in there, and I'm doing all kinds of stuff to make it work? Possibly. Like Velociraptor, for example, could be a replacement for this, but it doesn't scale very well. Because this right here, as a one-time discussion, cool, I could figure out a way to do that. Now I want you to scale this against 5,000 endpoints. And I want you to do that repetitively. I want you, as an incident response, I want you to roll onto a situation, and I want to have this done automatically. And that's kind of like the next level of where I think extensions and other add-ons into the platform should be used. Let me bring a bunch of different pieces together that we've talked about all day long. So we've talked about infrastructure as code. We've talked about detection as code. We've talked about my ability to write detection and response rules and then reference extensions and third-party tools in order to get even more data out of things and really expanding on the platform. Let's operationalize all this. What if I created an organization, and in that organization, I created a bunch of detection and response rules, and those rules said things like, hey, I want you to dump a list of active users every 15 minutes. Hey, I want you to tell me every single time one of these malicious processes are run. Hey, I want you to grab all the Windows event logs and I want you to run Hayabusa against them. And I want you to use Velociraptor to go and collect 2 or 3 different types of evidences of execution. What if I built all of that out and then I gave my customer a sensor installation package? What's going to happen the first time a sensor connects in? All of these processes are all going to kick off one by one. They're going to start to kick off, and now I've started wait a second, all this stuff is happening automatically in the background. I've got a bunch of sensors I can go look at, and I can see the output. I can see the collection that's happening. I can see the data that's coming back. I can see when they're checking in. I can see the parsed analysis. I can see the raw events. And all of a sudden, I'm working a case where time is of the essence. And me being first or me being ahead of the threat actor is critical to success. And I just automated the majority of information collection. What do my analysts have to do now? Analyze. Just go do your job. Just go look at the data and see what it tells you. This is like a very sore topic for me for the same reasons I talked about earlier. The amount of spin up and collection time that you'll have in cases, especially response cases, is a lot of times just way too much. It takes a long time to collect some of this data. It takes a long time to then subsequently parse and analyze it, and you're dealing with a lot of back and forth with customers. And it's not that that's a bad thing unless they're inefficient about your data request, in which case now they're giving even more time. But if you have an active adversary in an environment, or you're concerned that there is something that you need to deal with, I'm writing all of this ahead of time. And I'm going to take all of these different DNR rules and I'm going to keep them off to the side. And every time I get a new organization, it's a staple. They're going in automatically. Or, and this is like where a lot of things start to come full circle, right? The other thing that I could do is I could also, and I'm going to do this with one hand. Let's see if this can work. Come on, one more. Here we go. The final last little thing I could do is I could also come in here and I could templatize all of that. All of these detection and response rules, all of these automated capabilities, these third-party extensions, all these different tools, all this thing that I've said and defined in all these different processes, I can also templatize that. And I can say every single time I start an engagement, I don't have a template in here, name this, but let's just call it Matt's IR template because that makes it really easy. I'm going to create a template that says Matt's IR template. And every single time I create a new organization, it's going to automatically bring in all these rules, all these extensions, all these capabilities. Everything's going to be stacked and ready to go. So when I give that customer their very first agent installer and I say, go install this on your Windows systems or your Linux or your Mac or whatever, the second an agent starts to check in, I'm already off to the races. I'm already processing. I'm already running my way through data analysis, pulling stuff back because I know time is of the essence. The longer it takes me to pull a lot of this in and the longer it takes me to figure a lot of this out, the more time the adversary has to either cause more damage or to erase more evidence. And there's a catch-22 in here. The installation of an agent itself stomps on evidence. So you've got to be really careful about the timing and just know like, okay, I myself, I'm going to cause some issues here. But if I can be quick in grabbing some of the other data, I'm good to go. One of the other extensions that I want to drill into when we talk about extending the artifact, and by the way, for anyone who's curious, one of the first talks this afternoon, because there's going to be two after me, one of the first talks this afternoon is building your own extension, so you'll get to see more of like the technical side of that. But the one I wanted to pick on from a really cool perspective has to do with you and your security processes, the approach, the things that you want to do as part of your service or as part of your SOC. And it's this Cloud CLI one. So I already mentioned that it's an EDR sensor, which means I can tell the sensor, hey, go kill a process. Hey, go kill a network connection. Hey, go log that user off. Go run this script, whatever it might be. That's all great if all of my stuff happens on just EDR sensors. But wait, Matt, you spent like 15 minutes at the beginning of today telling us that not everything happens inside of EDR sensors. So if I built a response strategy that was dependent on EDR telemetry, am I not kind of shooting myself in the foot? Absolutely. So we built this little guy out earlier this year, this Cloud CLI extension. Huge props to the LimaCharlie team in the room that were responsible for bringing this together. Because what this does is it allows you to extend response actions to much more than just the endpoint sensor. This is where I can actually write response actions that go and hit Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, O365, DigitalOcean, whatever the sources might be. Or I should say whatever the different command line tools might be. And I can actually say something like, hey, I'm interested in a particular event inside of AWS. And if that particular event contains an EC2 instance that I don't think should be running anymore, folks, you're now at like the precipice of modern security circa 2017. AWS logs show me something malicious is happening. Okay, that's where a lot of detections would stop. And then a lot of SOC analysts would have to take over. And the SOC analyst would have to take over and say, okay, this thing is bad. Let me now submit a request. We'll hop over to AWS. Maybe, hopefully we'll have the permissions for it. And we'll go and we'll kill that instance. How long do you think that process takes from a security analyst to determine something is bad to actually remediating that particular thing? Yeah, too long is the answer. Too long it takes is way the answer because you know I'm already not a fan of time thieves, number one. Number two, the longer it takes, the more time the adversary has. Three, you might not even be talking to the right team. You might not even have the right team. You might have some analyst who's a junior analyst covering the overnight shift who all of a sudden runs into this thing because APT, Scattered Panda, or whatever they are, decided they wanted to attack the infrastructure that day. And the next thing you know, I got someone who's 6 months out of a cybersecurity degree trying to determine if they are responsible for shutting down AWS infrastructure. No offense to any adjective I use in there, that's not their wheelhouse. If I can take a detection and response rule instead, and I've got my detection engineering team, and they're liaising with the cloud team, the cloud infrastructure team, and we've built a process around, you know what? We're going to actually spin up credentials that enable the security team to cause certain actions or to perform remediative actions on behalf of the infrastructure team. Look how powerful this is. In this case right here, if my detection rule says there's something happening in AWS that I don't want to happen, jump in and shut down that EC2 instance. Automatically, programmatically, done. So that's how powerful response actions can get, is they can actually be used to go in and they can say, I want to reach out to one of these things. I want to have a remediative action on behalf of the users, on behalf of the whatever. This can apply across the board. And I like this. Someone asked me earlier, do you think LimaCharlie fits into a SIEM platform, into a SOAR platform? Like, where does it kind of land and all that? If Jessica was here and listening, she'd be happy for me to say that there's no Gartner, Magic, whatever that we fit into. There's no Forrester wave that I'm about to get my surfboard and ride. I'm just going to say it's whatever you want to build us out into. It's whatever you want to put LimaCharlie into. I work with a guy right now based out of Canada. He uses LimaCharlie for a complete Microsoft detection and response tool. He doesn't use any EDR sensors. He brings in Microsoft log data, and he's got about 50 of these response actions written out. He tells his customers, I've got sub 5-minute remediation. Sub 5-minute remediation abilities in what they do. And he essentially clears a lot of what he's got with his customers. And if they have someone log into Azure with an unauthorized platform, user password changed, done. You want to cry to the help desk? Go ahead. But guess what? You're not compromised. You're welcome, right? I'm obviously oversimplifying some of these things. But the point is, my response actions can get super powerful with the different extensions that we've got referenced there. So in the beginning of the day today, I brought up AWS, and I listed all those different products. And I said one of the things I really like about this is you can kind of link these things together with really simple ease. If you need to, that's this here. I've got the ability to bring in these third-party extensions, link them together into my detection and response rules, and say, I want to extend beyond just alerting, beyond just detections. I want to extend a little bit further into how I actually respond to these. We've got detection and response capabilities built out for a bunch of different open source tools. Strelka is another one. Velociraptor, as I mentioned earlier. Yara. We've also got funds. Hayabusa we talked about. Log to timeline / Plaso. If you've been in the defer game for a while, you know what this one is as well. But I don't want to focus so much on the names of the tools. I instead want to kind of impart everyone with like the idea of the process behind this. The endpoint sensor, it's a vehicle. That's all it is. It's a vehicle. Meaning, right now, I want you to just send signal and send telemetry up and down, back and forth. That's all I'm going to use you for. Cool, that works. I want to use you to deploy files. I want to bring that output back. I want to have you do this automatically and programmatically. It's still a vehicle. I'm just controlling it a little bit more and telling it what I want it to do. Go a step further. Let's break out of defensive security. And let's get into proactive security. We've also got an extension built in for Atomic Red Team. And I'm going to hop over to the actual dashboard for this one. I hope I have it enabled. If I don't, it's going to be mildly embarrassing. There we go. We've got an extension built out for Atomic Red Team. For anyone who's not familiar, Atomic Red Team is an open source tool that allows you to test security controls using a bunch of MITRE ATT&CK IDs as your guidance. Essentially, again, I'll break it down into basic English here for you. I want to test whether or not we would detect stealing or Kerberos silver ticket theft or silver ticket forgery. I'm just picking the second one on the list here, only because I didn't want to say SAML too many times because it just tends to mix me up. But let's just say there was a bunch of different tools here, or sorry, a bunch of different adversarial techniques that I wanted to test and try out. What Atomic Red Team is going to do is it's going to utilize some sort of pre-built script or command to make that activity happen inside of your environment and generate the telemetry so you can detect against it. Now let me be clear. If I utilize Atomic Red Team, it doesn't create the detection for you. It creates the telemetry that we would then go write detections against. Or you could do that in opposite order, which is I wrote a detection for bits admin. Let me see if it actually gets detected. Let me go run bits admin in an environment. Atomic Red Team lets you take that more proactive stance of, I think my detections do a thing. Let me go and actually run that event to see if it happens. But the concept of the endpoint being a vehicle stays the same. So rather than, hey, endpoint, I want you to run Velociraptor and go ahead and grab a bunch of forensic artifacts because we're investigating bad activity, I'm going to go the other route, and I'm going to say, hey, LimaCharlie, I want you to go and run a bunch of security control tests. Go run some scripts that steal passwords and run malware and implement persistence mechanisms and whatnot. I want to see if we can actually see them. I want to see if we can detect them. And this is where I think you've got a lot of power and flexibility in what some of the extensions can do, because now I potentially just created, not I, Matt, but what we just walked through, potentially just created a brand new service line. If I'm a managed service provider, and every up until this point, if I wanted to do any sort of security control testing for any of my customers, that's a brand new product and a brand new platform I've got to learn. Or I've got a light version of it here in LimaCharlie. Hey, we are worried, and this is the board question that comes down. I just read about an adversary who does all this sort of stuff with Kerberos tickets or whatever it might be, right? We're really worried about whether or not we're protected against this particular thing. That's a pretty typical conversation, I would hope. If it's not, I don't know. I don't know who you're providing services for anymore, but that's a pretty typical conversation that I used to get. I just read about this thing. Matt, are we defended against this thing? I'm curious to know. Here's what they're asking. They're asking, like, do you have a detection built in place for this adversarial technique? My response was always, let's find out. And then I would get on the phone, sorry, that's an old term. I would get on the phone with their SOC or their security analyst, and I would say, hey, I'm about to create a Kerberos ticket. I'm about to forge a golden ticket or steal a silver ticket or whatever it is. Let's talk about whether or not you actually see this. And they would, because I made sure they would. I'm just kidding. They would because they had telemetry in place. And then we would talk about what that process looked like. We would develop a playbook right there on the spot. I'm going to tell you all, there is nothing better than not only answering an executive question like that, but also empowering the security team to be like, not only do we detect it, we have a playbook in place, we have response actions, we have automated this, automated that. We got it. We're covered. Wash, rinse, and repeat for multiple MITRE attack techniques, for multiple questions from the board. And the next thing you know, you've got this security team that's super empowered and capable to say, yes, we defend against that thing. Why? Because we actually saw the telemetry cross the line, we saw the detection actually trip, and the response action actually follow up and do what it was supposed to do. Why? All because we were able to just simply take this little sensor and just manipulate it into these different types of vehicles and have it not only be a proactive tester, but also a reactive system as well. And the last thing I'll note in here, like everything else we've talked about, if you were to utilize Atomic Red Team in your environment, it itself is, as I mentioned, an observable event. This data is a little bit older, I know, but it itself is an observable extension, which means I can see exactly what's happening as it's running. The run started, the run was successful, it was not successful, here's the result that came back, here's the test data, so on and so forth. So I can get as granular as I need to, I can report on this, and I think the extensions really expand the power of what you can do with the platform itself. That's extensions and add-ons. I didn't dig too much into like the lookup capabilities and everything like that, only because I'm just watching time. And I myself only have about 50 minutes left today before I hand it off to some really skilled and like the actual smart people take over. So with that said, we're going to take a quick 5-minute bio break because I've been talking for almost an hour straight now. And we did build breaks into this. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We're going to come back at about 3:12. By the time I'm done talking. When we come back at 3:12, I'm going to finish us up by talking about outputs and then how to work these things into dashboards and whatnot to get some more reporting capabilities out of it. All right?